Good. Okay. Good morning and welcome to our board meeting today. We have one topic, which is the ratification of a recent EITF consensus. But before we start, I'd like to welcome cadets from the United States Coast Guard Academy. So thank you for coming in. We have a good morning planned for you, observing the FASB meeting and then going across the hall to observe the GASB meeting. And then we have some interaction with various members of the board. So thank you for making the drive down, and we welcome you today. With that, I'll turn it over to staff to begin the discussion.
Thanks, Russ. At the June 2019 meeting, the task force reached a consensus for exposure on EITF issue 19A that clarified certain interactions between topic 321, investments in equity securities, topic 323, investments in equity method and joint venture, and topic 815, derivative and hedging. The board subsequently ratified that consensus for exposure and issued a proposed accounting standard update. The board received 12 comment letters from respondents that generally supported those amendments in the proposed update. At its November 7th, 2019 meeting, the task force reached a final consensus on the two issues within issue 19A. So issue 1 in the handout, which is noted in paragraph 4, for equity, or for the accounting for equity securities upon the application and discontinuance of the equity method of accounting. The task force reached a consensus that an entity should consider observable transactions that would require the investor to either apply or discontinue the equity method of accounting for purposes of applying the measurement alternative under topic 321 immediately before applying or upon discontinuing the equity method. Issue 2 in the handout, which is noted in paragraph 5, scope considerations for forward contracts and purchase options on certain securities. The task force reached a consensus for the purposes of applying paragraph 815, 10, 15, 141A, an entity should not consider whether, upon settlement of the forward contract or exercise of the purchase option, either individually or with existing investments, the underlying securities would be accounted for under the equity method or to the fair value option under topic 825, financial instruments. The task force also reached a consensus to require prospective transition and to require an entity to disclose the nature of and reasons for the accounting principle change, the transition method, and a qualitative description of the financial statement line items affected by the change. The task force decided the amendments in the final update would be effective for public business entities for fiscal years beginning after December 15th, 2020, including interim periods within those fiscal years. For non-public business entities, the task force decided to provide a 1-year delay, which would make the effective date for fiscal years beginning after December 15th, 2021, including interim periods within those fiscal years. The task force also decided that early adoption be permitted in any interim period after the issuance of the final update, as the guidance may simplify the accounting for certain entities. Furthermore, the task force decided not to give any special consideration to non-public business entities when applying the guidance. The staff recommends that the board ratify the consensus reached by the EITF. With that, question 1 of the board meeting handout, does the board wish to ratify the consensus for issue 19A? I'll turn it over back to the board for any questions.
Thanks. Are there any questions, observations regarding issue 1 as stated in paragraph 4 of the board handout? About issue 2? About this consideration for non-public entities?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, the decision that the task force made and the staff recommended on the effective date for non-public business entities was 1 year later than public business entities. And you referenced the private company decision-making framework. Can you just tell us a little bit about why you included interim periods in that? Because the private company decision-making framework would say for annual periods, and then you begin interim periods in the following year. So could you just...
As we went through the fact patterns, we think the fact patterns are quite narrow. It's only going to come up, they're going to be discrete transactions that are going to be driving the accounting. And so because it's narrow, because it's discrete transactions, it's not continuous type of transactions that are likely going to be the scope of these two issues. We thought it'd be easier for them to apply it in the first interim period as opposed to coming back in time and applying it.
So I actually had the same question, and the reason why I questioned it was because what I heard in the past when private companies talk about why they want that interim delay, it's not the difficulty of the accounting systems, it's when they become aware of the fact that there is a change, and that it's not until their auditor comes in at the end of the period that they realize that there was something that went effective that year. So I was just
So I
a
had
little
thought-
surprised
I-
that we
yeah.
did that.
Yeah.
I have thought about that, but I'm comfortable with the EITF's consensus on the effective date and to not give the normal language of interim, because I view these as unique transactions that likely a typical private company that relies on their advisor to the accounting is going to need to rely on their advisor to do the interim accounting, because it's not a normal recurring transaction. That's in essence your point, right,
Yeah.
Chris? Yeah. So
Okay.
that's why in this case, I
That's what I
think,
think, too.
I think
Okay.
the consensus is fine with respect to the effective date. I did have another question about the non-public considerations, but before we move back to that.
That helps.
that's it.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense about whether this is these transactions are more or less common for private companies in relation to public companies, more or less common related to smaller reporting public companies versus larger, or?
Yeah. So
Or does it matter?
So we did do some research. So the EITF asked us, so that they couldn't reach. I'm sorry. So on issue 1 and 2, are you referring to? Or are you talking?
Issue 1 and 2, we'll get to
Okay.
the research in a second.
I think it's gonna. I think a lot of large public companies oftentimes have equity method investments for particular reasons, and so whether they're going to be stepping up in full consolidation or acquisition. And so I do think we have seen, and we did some research about how oftentimes there is a subsequent measurement under the observable or under the measurement alternative under topic 321. So we understand that has been used in practice. Now some of the research that we did that Tyler will go through in a moment. So we do think that is prevalent in the public business company space.
Okay. But as far as the distinction, but more or less in public-private, it's hard to tell how many.
Yeah, I think it's hard to tell from the XBRL data and research that we did. And the outreach that we did included some private companies, and so it does exist.
And remind me, I know there was.
Question maybe too more around the frequency.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
Because
think it's
it may
normal
be
to go
more
back and
frequent.
forth.
Yeah.
And then there was a PCC liaison available for the EITF, and they're not having any concerns about no measurement disclosure differences, right?
No, we haven't heard any
All right.
the outreach.
Any other questions before I call final vote on ratification of EITF 19A on issues 1, 2, the difference between public and private, and the effective dates? Okay, the board handout, question 1, who wishes to ratify the consensus for issue 19A? Okay, so that's all 7. Okay, so we'll look forward to the final drafting, excuse me, of that document and the final ballot, and then we'll get that out as a final
Yep.
consensus. Okay, so now let's move on to question 2. Sounds like that's Tyler's. Tyler's ready to go, all right.
So next we'll discuss the research related to recognizing investee losses when an investor has other equity investments in the investee. In its initial deliberations, the task force was unable to reach a consensus for exposure on whether to require accumulated equity method losses that have not been allocated to an investor's investments in the investee, that is, accumulated investee losses in the memo account, to be offset against any unrealized gains resulting from remeasurement of the investments due to an observable transaction in accordance with the measurement alternative in topic 321. As a result, the task force recommended that the staff perform additional research on the pervasiveness of this issue. At the November EITF meeting, the staff noted that, based upon our research, we do not believe this issue is pervasive for public business entities and asked the task force for feedback. The task force agreed with the staff, but noted that there could be a pervasive issue for private companies. As a result of this feedback, the staff plans to perform outreach regarding the pervasiveness of the issue with private companies, which may include outreach with members of the PCC. The staff plans to bring the feedback back to the board meeting for discussion at a later date. With that, question 2 in the board meeting handout is, does the board agree with the staff's planned outreach related to the issue on whether to require accumulated equity method losses that have not been allocated to an investor's investments in the investee to be offset against any unrealized gains resulting from the remeasurement of the investments due to due to an observable transaction in accordance with the measurement alternative in topic 321, investments, equity securities? If not, what additional outreach does the board want the staff to perform? I'll now turn it over to the board to discuss.
Jim?
So I'd find, talking to the PCC, I'm relatively less interested in what will be, even in the private company space, a somewhat uncommon transaction versus maybe broader input on whether or not there's a need to have models for allocating investor losses beyond what's already required for each class of security. I think all of that guidance originated with APB 18, where there wasn't robust models for derivatives, loans, and other things. And so I think it was a continuation of applying allocating equity method losses. That got into how do I reverse them, which created the broader issue of a memo account. To me, if we were going to do something, I would actually tackle that issue versus some obscure issue about how to do the memo account when you're applying a practical expedient that reverses. I mean, just, if it happens so infrequently as to be, almost noise, and the real issue is the broader issue. And so that's what I'd be interested in if we were to take on a project.
Christine?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly what Jim just said. I think we're worrying about the wrong problem here.
Okay.
So if there is a problem, I think it's more an issue with the use of the memo account, some problems with equity method accounting, how it's interacting with some other parts of the guidance. What I wouldn't want to see us do is end up in a situation where we say, well, it does happen on occasion, so let's tweak the accounting within this already sort of area that's quite complicated.
So what you're both saying is you're okay with a research project, but you think the project should be more expansive than what the task force had originally, or what the task force was thinking about.
I think the task force actually asked for the more expansive research as well. I remember Bob specifically asked for that, and then
Okay.
a couple of others even wanted to go further research. So I think there was no vote on the depth of the research, but those who spoke were calling for broader research than this.
But I
think it
guess
was-
I would say the only thing is, though, that if we are going to do that more expansive
Yeah.
project, there needs to be a reason to do. So the pervasiveness issue for me is still a relevant question.
Right. The reason I'm
but
asking the
if-
question, I'm trying to help the staff, is what's going to be so once we decide the parameters of research, we still need to ask ourselves
Right.
pervasiveness, cost-benefit solutions before it come back. But we could say, study all of the equity method, or study some component of the equity method, or study even a narrower component. And I hear what you say, what you're all saying is, let's not study all equity method, but let's study a broader component than what the staff's brought to us. Is that fair?
I would study the allocation of losses beyond the equity investment and whether or not we need that. Frankly, I'd be surprised if it isn't an area of high error in private companies because it's a bunch of sort of unwritten, the actual interpretive guidance and how to apply the memo account is not something that's intuitive or easily findable, so it wouldn't.
We don't often have codification reference to memo account.
Yeah, so that's why I would be interested, not just the very, very narrow and unique fact pattern here, but is the PCC seeing this more broadly? Are they aware of the literature? Are companies getting it right? And is it a problem? If it's not, I'm not looking for solving problems that don't exist.
So you would say.
We have two questions here, right?
Yeah,
Not
hold
one.
on. You would say, let's first consult the PCC before we decide the scope of the research. Yeah. Okay, so your two questions?
Well, I think, we've expanded question 2 to questions 2A and 2B.
Yes.
So I think we should ask 2A, 2B, and
Yeah. Hal, you want to?
I would have gone with a much broader scope on this, because I think that equity method has long outlived its useful life, but I recognize the practical realities. I would, if I were talking to the PCC, I'd want to explore that notion. Has it exceeded
Okay.
its useful life? But recognizing that we probably are going to scale this back, but I'd rather start there and then scale it back, at least in our discussions.
Sue?
I'm a little torn because I agree with what what everyone said about the equity method of accounting, but I'm also a little
You can say that out loud. Go ahead.
I'm also a little scarred from a
From the last
project we had on our
experience.
agenda about the equity method accounting a couple of years ago. And so I'm cautiously optimistic. I'd be happy to, I'd like the staff to do some limited outreach with the private company council, but before we did much more than that, I'd like to take a pause and maybe have a little bit of a more well-rounded analysis of what exactly we're going to research.
To be clear, I am not looking to get rid of the equity method. I think this is a narrow aspect where there wasn't guidance. So I am not looking for, let's go ask, I don't think from our last project, the PCC actually supported broadly what the allocation of basis difference.
That's right.
Absolutely supported. And we didn't move forward. The PCC was not looking to eliminate the equity method.
Marcia?
Yeah, I'm not in support of taking on a project to evaluate whether we should eliminate the equity method. But I appreciate Sue's comments that reinventing the wheel is not always a worthwhile exercise. But if we keep this at an outreach at this phase, I think that that's a useful conversation to have in case we've missed something. But the pervasiveness of this, to me, doesn't seem to be particularly high. And I think the outreach will hopefully confirm that as well.
So let me ask, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to, the only point I'm trying to make is that, and Jim alluded to it, this was a standard written well before many other standards, well before the computer age in accounting. A lot of things have happened since then. And I think at a minimum, while I appreciate Jim's comments of not making too much change here, I would not want to just let it rest that, well, that's the best way of accounting.
Right.
And I'd much rather have a discussion about cost benefit and why we're keeping the equity method as opposed to saying, oh, that is the best method of accounting. Because I don't personally believe that.
So let me see if the board would be comfortable with the following, and it'll indirectly, it will directly help some and may indirectly help Hal's point. We would ask the staff to consult with the SBAC, consult with the PCC, and consult with others about what are some opportunities to simplify the use of the equity method by understanding where there are current unnecessary costs, where there is current confusion, and where there is lack of awareness in the investment community about how the equity method is applied. As a result of that would all come back to the board, and we could understand the pervasiveness of this, understand what may be cost-effective solutions to reduce cost, improve quality, improve awareness. And the end result of that could be there aren't cost simplifications and we should look at changing the equity method. That would be your indirect. Or there are cost-effective solutions and we make those. That would be kind of the scope of it, but it seems like, and we know where there are 3 or 4 areas that we think there's unnecessary cost, and we could help the advisory committees to understand this and ask them to confirm that and see if there's others. But that's really the first step, and then we can come back as a board and decide at that point, do we want to go wider or narrower? Does that seem, everyone okay with that? All right, okay, so that's,
Okay.
thank you, Chris. Tyler, Amy. Okay.
Now, fortunately, we have a PCC meeting and an SBAC
Yeah.
meeting in
Yeah.
December, so
Yeah.
if you can weave it in,
Yeah, we'll see if we can
that'd be great.
incorporate some feedback.
Especially there's a joint component to
Yeah.
the meeting.
Yeah.
And that's why I brought up the SBC.
Yeah.
So they're there. And then, other groups, or maybe certain preparer groups that this is more common in.
I could
don't-
certainly reach out
Reach
to
out. Certain
some
industries
that
may
have
be
had
more
some
common than others.
experiences with losses
Yeah.
from ventures.
Yeah.
Farm.
Pharma. Okay. All right. Anything else for the day? No. Okay, great. Thanks. We're adjourned. Okay.
I had those experiences at one. Asbestos, breast implant.
Not sure if you're shooting nails.
I had lots of experience with losses. And we were quite happy they were equity method.
We all have long
I would-
memories, results, everything, and this is kind of a summary.
That's like, I would just get